Yeah, so good morning, everyone. So welcome to our talk. So we are going to give a talk on how to grow your design proposal so that the process meets your need. So briefly talking about myself. So I am Dipesh. I'm a software developer at IBM. So I'm mostly involved with the Kubernetes community. So I'm the member of SecDocs. Currently leading the enhancement team for 1.33. And you would see me lurking around in Kubernetes repos and various slacks. And I'll let Fabian give his intro.
Hello, I'm Fabian. I'm a KubeVirt maintainer, like a quite old Kubernetes ecosystem project.
Thank you. So what are we going to discuss today? So we are going to discuss the enhancement proposal process from the perspective of two projects, that is Kubernetes and KubeVirt. So why have we chosen those two projects? So Kubernetes is a very big beast, is a graduated project, and KubeVirt relatively is a smaller project who is starting their journey towards getting a process defined for enhancements. So let's start with what Kubernetes has at present. So brief history of Kubernetes. So last year Kubernetes, as you might know or you might not know, celebrated 10 years. So the first commit for Kubernetes was on 6th of June 2014, and it was 250 lines of code. And how I wish those were still true and we still have only 250 lines, but things have moved on, and Kubernetes was the first CNCF project that was graduated. It was graduated in 2018, so it is the part of class of 2018. And over the course of 10 years, it has been one of the largest open source projects. As you can see the numbers which I have pulled from DevStats, there are over 95,000 contributors, 1.5 million contributions that are going in, and we do have quite a bit small number of reviewers, that are 7.5K reviewers who are trying to review those 4.5 million contributions. So when you have this level or this scale of the project, how is the enhancement or the feature going into that project? So before we had a formal enhancement process defined, how was things before that? So before, what we were doing is we were discussing all the proposals or features that were designed to go into a release on Slack, on mailing chain, on GitHub issues. And those were fine. The problem is, as the project grows larger and larger, it becomes very difficult to track as to what was being discussed. And so it was becoming difficult that we needed a process. So what did we do? So we enter the KEP process. So as much as I would like that we invented this process, it was not true. We were inspired from the processes that was already defined. So we took inspiration from Python PEP, that is the Python enhancement process, and the process for Rust, that is request for comment. So we were inspired by their process. So the third process is that the skills are transferable. So if you know an enhancement process in one project, it is easier, or it in theory will be easier to understand the enhancement process for another open source project. So what is the summary or the idea behind a KEP? So the KEP is basically a document that is going to live in Git. So it is tracked, version tracked, and you can track across multiple releases. You can see the history. So it is a very comprehensive document. It is more than a design document. It has grown over the years. It gives you all the, what was the motivation behind this? How is this feature going to be tested? What is the testing impact as the feature moves on from alpha, beta, and stable? So the basic core of the KEP process is we are not interested, or we are not bothered about just merging the code. It's building the confidence around what the change is going into a release. So what qualifies as a KEP? So anything or everything that has a broader impact on your project is going to be classified as a KEP. So for Kubernetes, that comes down to any user or operator visible changes, any major refactor or that requires a cross-SIG collaboration. SIG is nothing but special interest groups, or any API changes or architectural shifts. But these are not hard-coded requirements, so SIGs or the special interest group have flexibility as to decide what is the threshold for a change for it to qualify as a KEP. So the tip that I can give you, so if a feature or it is something that you are going to talk about in a design meeting, so probably it needs a KEP. So what is Kubernetes Enhancement Proposal or KEP looks like at present? So basically it boils down to 3 artifacts that we have that are stored in Git. So first is the kept template. So this is the template that defines all the documents what are related to your enhancement proposal that is going to go inside the document. So there is a set of template that we have defined which gives all the section what goes into that sections and when to fill this section, as in for alpha we require certain sections, for beta we require certain sections, and for stable we require certain sections. Then is the kept metadata file. So this is basically a YAML file that gives you a helicopter view or an overview of the kept. So if you are familiar with project management or business management, you might have heard about DACI model, that is DACI, that is a driver, approver, contributor, and informed. So basically this files gives you all the information of who are the key drivers, who are the CAP authors or the owners that are involved with this CAP. It gives you the detail of the approvers, that is who is the SIG that are leading, who are the collaborating SIG, who are the approvers for SIGs for this CAP. And then it gives you the contributor who are actually going to implement that enhancement, and then informed is the community from this file, as we can see the transparency. Next is the PRR, that stands for production readiness review. So these are the set of questionnaire that is present in the CAP template. So just to ensure that the feature being proposed is not going to break something in production. So this is reviewed by the independent team that is outside of the SIG that is proposing the CAP, and once they are happy with the answers or they are happy with what is being proposed in the CAP, they get a PRR approval. So this approval is captured by a separate file, that's again a YAML file that is stored in the GitHub enhancements repo. There we can see the stage for which currently the CAP has an approver and the name of the approver, PRR approver who has approved that PRR. So I have given the links of the enhancement, the templates, and the CAP YAML where it explains what the various fields means and what were the motivations behind it. So now the question comes, we have a CAP, there is a process defined, we have defined all our CAPs. So how is that CAP related to our release? So Kubernetes releases thrice a year, so it's typically 15 to 16 weeks of effort. So during the start of the release, from week 1 to I would say week 4, there is discussion amongst the SIGs and the various contributors as to what feature they want to be inside the release. Once that discussion has happened, what happens is they apply a lead opted in. So basically it's a GitHub label. Once that label gets applied to the CAP, we have an automation that is Prow, so you can think of it as GitHub action. What it does is it picks up all the issues that have been opted in and it dumps it into a GitHub project board, that is the tracking board. And then the enhancement team, which is the part of the release team, which I'm currently reading for this release 1.33, takes the CAPs from the release board and tracks all those CAPs. When I say track, what do we do? So what we do is we verify all those metadata, all the whether the template is following the standard template, is any section missed, is the metadata appropriate as to what the stage the CAP is targeting, is the PRR question completed and the PRR has been approved. At the moment it is a manual effort, so someone needs to go open the CAP, go to all the files and verify whether all those things are passing in. So as an enhancement team, we enforce 2 key checkpoints. First is the enhancement freeze that locks in the scope. So when I say locks in the scope, it locks in that you are no longer allowed to change the files that are related to the CAP that you are targeting for this release. Next, once the scope is logged in, then starts the implementation and the testing of that feature that is actually going to go into this release. So then the next deadline is the code and the test freeze. By that deadline, we want all the implementation PR of that enhancement needs to be in an approved state so it can be merged in and going into the release. So now there will be instances where your CAP is going to be missing those deadlines, and unfortunately with heavy heart we have to remove it from the release. When I say remove it, we just keep a status on the GitHub tracking board as removed. But then there is a process of requesting an exception, and exception is basically you are going to request extra days from the release team, like we need 2 days or 3 days more to do the pending task, And once those tasks are done, those KEPs are again being tracked and they are going to be considered for the release. So I have linked the tracking board for our current release, and there is a comprehensive handbook as to what the enhancement team does and what are those activities that we do throughout the release. Okay, so now we have KEP defined, we have a process to track those KEPs in a release. So what are we getting out of this? So over the years, we have seen that the KEP process has given a lot of benefit as it has improved the transparency, as we can say what was the reason behind this change, because as I said, those templates are very comprehensive. It gives you the motivation behind why those changes were suggested. It gives us traceability as to trace why this feature was included in certain release, and we can track those features across the release as it matures over the release. And then it gives an aligned process for various SIGs for cross-SIG collaboration. And then there is a centralized place, as we are using GitHub for all the documents and the status and the history. And those are actionable items, as in you can drive your project roadmaps based on the features or the KEPs you have collected over time. And then once you have a process defined, it is very easy for new contributors to come in and take the ownership and help. So I would say at the heart of the KEP process is communication, clarity, and shared understanding. So, okay, now we have a KEP process defined, it is giving benefits. Is everything all right? Everything going smoothly? No. So there have been challenges that we have noticed over time, and we have addressed few, some we are in the process of addressing. So the challenges what we see is, when you have a process defined, there is a lot of writing and maintenance overhead, and what happens is sometimes the contributors do not tend to update the KEPs because, frankly speaking, we are less interested in documentation, and everybody wants to code and focus on code. So the KEPs are getting outdated, and if you don't have a clear scope defined, it could slow down the velocity of your project. So what are the lessons that we have learned? So we have learned that not every change that is going into your project is going to be needing a KEP. So we have given those liberty to the SIGs to define what is the threshold for their change to be classified as a KEP. And what we suggested, you start small, start with something that is provisional, and then that you can evolve iteratively. And then having a clear metadata file like we have in a cap.yaml is very key, because those files you can use in external tooling like dashboards or any other tooling to see the view or the health of your project. And last point, all this tooling with GitHub or over Slack or the automation helps, but the process also needs to evolve as the project is growing. So in the end, I would like to say that, yes, there are challenges with this process. It is not perfect, but it is just that it needs additional care. So communication and ownership are something essential that is needed for a success for a process like an enhancement process in a project. So this was a very high-level overview of what Kubernetes does. So what about a smaller project that does not need everything that Kubernetes does? So I would like to invite Fabian, will speak about KubeVirt enhancement process.
Cool. So KubeVirt. So KubeVirt is a CNCF project for a while. I think we're going back like 8 years. And here I want to speak about how was actually our evolution going. How was our evolution with regards to features? How did we start, and where are we today? So just a little bit of basics about KubeVirt. I mean, it doesn't matter too much. Kubernetes extends Kubernetes to allow you to create, migrate, and manage virtual machines natively alongside container workloads on top of Kubernetes. It's like a cloud-native application. It's a couple of controllers. It's using, you can deploy with Helm and so on and so forth. It was started in 2016. We got into Sandbox in 2019, incubated in 2022. And in order to follow the 3-year rhythm, we want to graduate in 2025. All right, so KubeVirt enhancements. In the beginning, there was really, let's get this project started, right? So we had nothing with an empty Git repository, and we wanted to add features like virtual machine live migration, very popular. It was just a PR with 2 lines of a documentation, and that's almost it, right? So in 0.1, there was really no process, but there was only 3 or 4 people contributing to KubeVirt. 1.0, which is which we did I don't know, 4 or 5 years later after the inception of the project, Well, let's speak about 0.8, which is not on the slide. Something around that time, we started to require longer PR descriptions, right? So we had a PR template, and in the PR template, we required people to explain a little bit what is the feature about. Some people follow it, others didn't, and usually it was like still the small cabal of 4 to 5 to 6 people writing the code and approving it. So it was a very fast turnaround time, right? So we were able to deliver code really, really fast in a very opinionated way, and that was helpful for the beginning. Once we started to approach like 1.0, which is like our first stable release, and it was I think it must be around 2022, we started to introduce a more formal process, right? So we wanted to have something that is forward-looking. Before somebody's opening, like the PRs got longer and longer, right? You had like 1,000 lines of changes. And it was like dropped there overnight, and the ask was, yeah, we need to get it merged in a week. But there was no alignment. Like, we got to the challenges, right? So that's how it worked. Then we got to the community repo to at least learn about what are you planning to do, right? What is coming up? So we had a community, or we still have a community repo where we organize our own conference, like the KubeVirt Summit, where we also organize a little bit of like community things. And there we added a design directory, right, where we then started to keep an enhancement template. And in this template, we started to, okay, what is the goal of this enhancement? What are our non-goals? So a little bit inspired by the Kubernetes enhancement process, but slimmed down, right? I think we had like 3 or 4 or 5 top-level sections that had to be addressed, and that's it. However, that was it, right? It was only this template, and that worked for a while, right? So how did it work, right? You would go to the if it was the right time of the day and you had some interest in it, you could decide freely up on yourself if you want to go to the community repository, create a PR, copy that template, fill in the details, and submit it to the community repo. I'm filling in for Andrew Burden, who's out sick and could not be here today, so I apologize that I don't have like fancy screenshots here. So please use your imagination. So there was there were PRs in our community repo about design proposals, right? How do we implement hot plug for network, for storage, for networking? But they were like intermixed with other proposals, right? Staffing at a booth at some conference, or changing the ownership of something else. And there was nobody there. There was no process around it. Like, who's picking it up? What is going to happen to that proposal anyway? Is it mandatory? Is it like is it like the source of truth or something? All of this was not really defined. And that led to some problems, right? So did it bring any transparency to what people wanted to do, what they wanted to achieve? And not really, not always, and the T is missing. So we really did not have an understanding who does what, right? Like, what is being contributed to KubeVirt and why, right? So we just had we continue to have at times feature drops, like somebody could still open just a PR with a feature, like 1,000 lines of code, or they could open this community repo PR in order to prepare the maintainers for it. Traceable, sort of, right? So you can browse through the Git log and see who contributed what PR and what was mentioned in the PR description or in the commit descriptions. But there was not really a discussion of the feature. There's traceability of who did it, right? But when and why and what is the state today, right? We had ideas like, virtual machine preferences following I think it was pod preferences very early on. And there was no place to track, right? Did we want to go to state? It was an alpha feature, and should it GA or not, right? Eventually we decided to reject it, but it was nowhere written down. We also have a feature called feature gates, which is similar to what we have in Cube. So you can turn on features, but their semantics, what does it mean? When is a feature gate required? Do we ever want to get rid of it? What is the default, on or off? All of this was not defined, right? People were using it depending on the phase of the moon. And alignment, right? I mean, while there were now, today we have many more people. We have around, across the project, I think 20 approvers or so for different parts of the project. We have around 150 developers contributing. If we look at a quarter or so, I think it's 150 developers and 20 companies roughly. So we have some sort of alignment, right? If it's the right feature and the right people became aware of it, there's some kind of alignment. but eventually we miss something, right? For example, in hotplug, we started to contribute hotplug, and there are usually like three main parts. It's compute, storage, and network. And while network and compute, like CPU and memory, aligned on a certain approach, storage did not notice it and went with something else. It's no blame, right? It's just that there was no alignment. Centralized, I think this was our smallest problem because we had the community repo, right? So if somebody volunteered and opened a PR, then it was still central. It was like a little bit lost, but like centralized was not our problem. Actionable. So what happens, like, you know, if you have an enhancement, what is happening with it? Like, I mean, there's also an author of that feature, right? So to give like some guarantee to that author or like some predictability to that author was really difficult. Will anybody pick it up? Will it release in any release? Will it land in any release? Do we like it or not, right? Is it aligned to the mission of the project? All of this was never defined. So it really depended like on personal relationships if something was moving forward or not. And that also relates to inclusiveness because it relates on personal relationships often. It's no blame again, right? So we learned from this. It was also difficult for new contributors to get in, right? How should new people who we really appreciate and who did deliver good stuff, but how do they know who to reach out to in order to get their stuff in? So these were all issues that we had. And then we saw Kubernetes, the wonderful enhancement process, which is wonderful. They have a lot of automation, but it was too feature-rich to us. So we took the Kubernetes enhancement process because we said we live in the Kube ecosystem. We want to be easy for anybody being in the Kube ecosystem, so we tried to derive it from it, right? So we effectively took that template. I wonder what licenses used for the enhancement template. And we stripped out some stuff, right? So there was a lot about, I don't know, towards the end of the document, there's a lot of stuff that you can fill in, and we removed a lot of that. So I think we cut it by half. And we created, so we had a new template. That was similar to what we had in the community repo. So what we did is, we actually did the major change. We have 8 minutes left. You're free to leave already. So the major change, I think, is not so much on the like describing the stuff. It's more about what we enforce. Today we require people, so we created a dedicated repository, KubeVirt enhancements, similar to Kubernetes enhancements. In there, if you want to contribute a bigger feature, we ask you to open an issue, right? A GitHub issue. And in that GitHub issue, we have a small template, right? What's the purpose of that PR? Who is the contact for that feature? Because sometimes there are like 3 or 4 people contributing to something, so having like a central point of contact, like on the feature side, was very helpful. So we defined like, what is it about? Who's the primary contact for the feature? What is the maturity currently? And third, who is the one on the KubeVirt side, right? So on the maintainer side, so that we effectively connect who is sending us something and who's on the receiving side to make that a little bit more clear and what is the status of it. So that is tracked in a GitHub issue, and from there we simply then link the description of that feature. And that is already, I just looked earlier today, so we started doing this in 1.5, which is like a couple of weeks old. And we started into that enhancement process like 2 months ago, and by now we already have 30 features which are following this process. And that's already helpful because you immediately see a list of features that are proposed. You see who's sending it, who's working on the KubeVirt side. Like these 2 people can speak. So important to note is maybe on the receiving side, on the KubeVirt side, we also pushed hard for special interest groups like Zix, like in Kube, to get away from this personal relationship. Right, so when somebody's submitting a feature in KubeVirt now, there are 2 people who decide which ZIC is this going to. So they immediately route it to the relevant ZIC, and they decide who is the point of contact for that feature owner. Right, so we started to decentralize, and creating these ZICs was also a 2-year of effort, to rework the project to follow ZICs. So, and those are the essentials. We have ZICs to become a less personal or be more inclusive. On the other hand, have few people who route it to the ZICs and make it like, a contract between the sending and receiving side to then know what is happening to a feature. And I think that's it. So it's a process for getting initial review and assessment of that feature you proposed via the core maintainers. It's 2, Lubo and Vladek. Lubo will be here tomorrow or in 2 days. The ownership will be transferred once it's coming into one of these ZICs. The primary reviewer will be assigned coming from one of the ZICs usually, and helping to drive this VEP, virtualization enhancement process, through its life cycle. So the TLDR is we handhold you and guide you through this process. And before it was like throwing something against the wall and see if it would stick and somebody would pick it up. So today, like, we learned and we try to, guide them more. So what is the essence for you maybe? Like if you've got a growing project, start to think about this early, because I think something that's not in the slides is how long it took and how much energy it took. You know, how many discussions you had with all the maintainers, first to create the SIGs and then get this process done. So it's always like a balance, right? How much process do you add? We have many people coming from OpenStack, by the way, and OpenStack like drowned in processes, so they were like fearful to introduce processes on our side. But it's a balance, right? Don't like code quality and like lean processes. I would rather start to think about them 2 years earlier than what we did now. Thank you very much for being here. Have a good time and questions. I have T-shirts for questions and stickers. Wonderful.
So it seems like you don't have like a code freeze date. So is there like a set of features that have to get into release before you cut, or is it more based on the Kubernetes cutting, or how do you determine that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. How do we cut releases and how do we see what features are going to land in a release? We try to be good citizens in our CNCF ecosystem. So we said, and actually there's a good reason, right? So KubeVirt really depends on many low-level details. So we decided to follow the Kubernetes release schedule. So we've got 4 releases a year, 3 releases a year now. We had 4 before. And we're trailing like Kubernetes by 2 months, just to have to like stabilization and integration testing. It gets in what's getting in, right? So we have code features by now. So we actually had a release schedule much earlier than we had like the enhancement process. And that was now extended to have like, that's our deadline for features, which is around like when Kubernetes GAs, then roughly, right? Then, and you can look up the schedule, it's all on GitHub. Then you have to have a feature ready, so it must be merged, so that we have the whole integration period to test that feature, right? And to fix any blocker bugs. So yes, we have a well-defined, I think that is well-defined, our release schedule, and it's trailing Kubernetes by 2 months approximately. You get a T-shirt, a sticker, just come by. Yeah, sure.
Hey, so I'm a Flux maintainer. We also follow the Kubernetes release process, and we try to do it 3 times per year. But sometimes you have a feature that we have an RFC process is very similar to what you guys described. Maybe that feature is so important and it's actually done, right? Would you do a 4th release? Or you would say like, even if it's done, if everybody wants it, we are going to pause it and wait, let's say, another 2 months because we have this fixed schedule. How you deal with this type of...
The question is, if there's a really important feature, do you wait or don't you? So until a year ago, we had like actually monthly releases to accompany that, right? So to compensate for this. So we had monthly releases just that it doesn't matter when you get a release. And today, it depends. So we have exceptions, but we have an exception process. If there's a really an important enough feature, and it's really just missing like the last 10, 20, 50, 90%. No, I think 90 would be too much, right? But if there's a feature basically in, it's just like this thing is missing, I think we tolerate, right? It's a discussion, right? It's a case-by-case discussion. There's no like, we're not that far, right, that we have like automation around features and so on. So I think we had like once or twice that we requested to delay the release by a week or 2 to let that feature slip in.
So you would release at some point 4th?
Yeah. I think that is our cadence, right? We do want to release. I think at the heart, we need to stay on a time-based schedule, because if you start to, we have like feature-driven development or feature-driven releases and time-based releases. And KubeVirt is a time-based release. And then sometimes, it's bad luck, but there's worse stuff in the world than honestly missing a KubeVirt release. So 4 months later, you can have it. And by the way, we have community members who backport features, right, to their downstream branches, or like, that they can catch up. We have nightly builds as well, if you really need to test it.
So you backport features?
Not us, downstreams, right?
Downstreams. Thank you.
Sure. T-shirt as well, or sticker, or both. Great. Any hands? Josh, question? No. Cool. Thank you very much. If there's nothing else.
So, if you were, this is for both of you, if you were starting a new cloud native project and designing an enhancement process for that new project, assuming there were going to be a bunch of people involved, what would it look like?
Beautiful. I mean, the questions, oh, go ahead. I forgot.
Yeah, how would I start? So, see, one of the feedback or in my conversations I hear from people is not everybody is familiar with Git or GitHub, right? We take it for granted that everybody knows Git and GitHub. So I would suggest that we start small, but we use Git, but it does not have to be Git or GitHub process heavy so that we attract new contributors, they get familiarity, and then gradually we scale. So I'm not suggesting we go into random Google Docs links or create announcements like that. I would suggest start small, maybe use GitHub issues, branch a PR out of it, create a one file, just stick to that one file, see how that process goes, see how people are comfortable growing that process, and then scale from there.
I think if you really start, right, you want to have people contributing. So I wonder, let's forget about, like my personal opinion is forget about the feature process, right? Because initially, I mean, the question is what do you want to do, right? What's the objective of the project? Do you really want to create a long-lasting CNCF project? Do you want to get it up and running? Right, there's a balance, right? If you start with a feature, like a process-heavy process in the beginning, then you might scare people. And that's why we said in KubeVirt, right? We start with a lean process just to get people attracted to it, try it, help to contribute. So but then making that shift is difficult. So I would say I would start easy in the beginning, if you ask me. What do you think? Okay. Cool. Anybody else?
I think we are at time.
Then we are at time.
Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Thank you very much.